Hey there guys, gals, and non-binary pals, it's DMG and welcome back to Blitz, and today we are going to have a more advanced selection on armor. I like to call this all about armor, or AAA. I don't really know what you want to call it, but this will be discussing what I believe to be as a good armor profile and what you should be looking for in an armor profile when you're thinking about driving a tank. And I think overall this video reinforces why I drive tanks that aren't too fast and aren't too slow. Just have a very nice balanced mix of traits, aka medium tanks would fit that bill, but there are some heavy, some tank destroyers, and even some light tanks that can also fulfill these roles as well. So anyways, when we're looking at what is a good armor profile, I have defined it to 3 things. And what that is 1, have good turret armor. Now, by having good turret armor, it allows you to have so many more options in the game as compared to when you don't. Now, let's look at a hypothetical scenario. One tank will have turret armor. The other tank will not. Now, which one of these tanks do you think is better than the other? I think a lot of you would say the Patton, simply because it has turret armor, as this is the weakness of the FB4202. Its lack of turret armor prevents it from going hull down, abusing ridge lines using its 10 degrees of gun depression. And while the Patton only has 9 degrees of gun depression, which albeit is still good, but less than the FB4202, its turret armor is so much better. And it allows you to hold a position. Now, when I first started out in the game, I thought that superior gun and superior mobility created superior opportunities. And to an extent, that is true. So let's look at the Leopard 1. This, for me, was the epitome of that whole modus operandi. That a superior gun would give you superior opportunities, or tactically, if you created superior opportunities, you could use your superior gun, if you had your superior mobility, using it to create superior opportunities, your superior gun would go to work. You guys understand what I'm saying, right? However, I failed to realize just how important turret armor was. Because I always thought that if you couldn't pen the target frontally, or if you were struggling, you could always use this mobility, the superior mobility of the Leopard 1, to create other opportunities to use your superior gun. However, I never realized just how important being able to hold a position was. Holding a position is technically an option as compared to moving. Holding a position is a movement option. Having no movement, choosing to do nothing, is a very, very strong option that tanks must be able to have. Some kind of durability, some kind of deterrent to push, some ability to hold a ridgeline and prevent the other team from just chasing you around the battlefield as you try and micro them down. Now let's look at the Patton again. The Patton has turret armor. So let's say we're on Canyon, right? And I always stress that the middle area is the most important part of Canyon. If the Leopard tries to go up there and hit shots at all the people crossing, and poke on the other side and try and spot, it doesn't really have turret armor. You may get one lucky bounce, but it's probably not going to happen, even if you have the superior weapon. However, while the Patton's gun isn't as good, it's almost as it's adequate enough, and the turret armor is good, allowing it to poke on that mid-ridge of Canyon with impunity almost, and allows it to bounce shots, feel more comfortable up there, get shots off that the Leopard 1 would not. So having turret armor is the most important thing in the game in terms of a profile. Another thing that I think really showcases why turret armor is important is, let's look at the FB4202 again, and then now let's look at the STB. Both have 10 degrees of gun depression, but one has turret armor and one does not. And while the STB does not have, I would say, overpowered turret armor, it's good enough. It's adequate enough, and I'll describe that a little more later. But the STB's armor is focused on the turret, while the FV4202's armor is focused on the hull, that front plate over there. But the problem is the amount of times you will be able to see a tank's hull and not its turret versus the amount of times you will be able to see a tank's turret and not its hull is very slim. It's very small. There are only a few situations where the FV4202's design is really, really good. I mean, I could kind of see it if you were trying to shoot under a train car on dead rail or desert sands, something like that, where you necessarily won't see the turret, but you may see the hull, or like some of the train cars on Himmelsdorf. I think you can kind of shoot under if your tank is low enough, if you're like in a 140 or a 62A. And then the FV4202's extra hull and knife-like shape make it really good. But guys, those situations are few and far between. Whereas the STB, any ridgeline, you're gonna be seeing the turret first. And if you have any clue on how to use gun depression, having turret armor is going to be so much more important to you than having hull armor. Hull armor is more for when you get pushed. But if you learn how to play the game, right, and you start to get pushed, then you should run. But just being able to hold the game in a position in neutral like the STB can or the M48 can, that's really important. That gives you some flexibility in your options and your decision making going forward in the game. Whereas if they decide to push you in an FV4202, well, yes, you have the hull, but they could just keep the game in neutral and keep trying to snipe your turret, which is fairly large too, so it's not all that good. So I hope this shows why having turret armor is just so important. My next point for having a good armor profile that at least I look for is have mobility to support your armor. Now this is why I don't drive tanks that are too slow or tanks that are too fast. Tanks that are too slow can't really get their armor profile into the game quick enough to be effective. Tanks that are too fast don't really have enough armor in the first place, aka the RU-251. You're not really getting any bounces in that, which is why I seldom drive that, or drive it only on occasion. Anyways, I think a really good example of this is in Tier 9. Let's look at what was previously one of the most armored tank destroyer, or the most armored tank destroyer in the game. This is the T-95. And now let's look at a heavy tank, the E-75. Now, before the T-95 was nerfed, it got its cupolas nerfed and its sides nerfed in terms of its armor. But even still, it is extremely difficult to pen, right? If you cannot get its side, or if you don't have enough penetration to go through the weak points. T-95 also has a better weapon, 640 Alpha, more DPM, more penetration, a little bit less shell velocity, but better aim time, same dispersion, and overall it's just on a very low profile, which makes it kind of hard to deal with in some scenarios. However, the T-95 struggles to use its armor because it just cannot get to the front line fast enough. How many times have you seen a T-95 go town or just sit in the spawn, and by the time like the battle is over, the T-95 is still trying to go somewhere, or by the time it gets to the front line, the battle is already over, and then it just becomes like a 1v5 for the T-95, or your team has already won and clobbered the other guys, and the T-95 has done absolutely nothing. This is exactly why having good mobility to support your armor is important. Now, the E-75, on the other hand, goes 40 kilometers an hour. Or let's take a look at the IS-7. And I know this is cross tiers, but I hope this is illustrating my point here. The IS-7 takes a pretty darn good armor profile. And yes, it's not E3 level. It's not mouse level armor profile. But it's close. And it takes it at 50 kilometers an hour. and it allows it to put its armor into play early in the game to have an effect on the outcome of the battle, whereas the T-95 cannot. The T-95 has to have enemies come towards it, and it's very reactive. It needs to be engaged. It has a lot of trouble engaging the enemy, whereas if the enemy rushes the T-95, that's great early in the game. If they rush to the other spawn, that's great. But in Tier 9 and 10, I mean, yes, there are noobs, but you usually don't see people YOLOing into the enemy spawn like you do at Tiers 1 and 2, right? So the T-95's armor profile just is not supported by its mobility, whereas let's say the E-75, you can take that Tier 9 armor profile, and while it is not as thick as the T-95, you can put its armor profile into play against medium tanks, tank destroyers, heavy tanks much earlier into the game and maybe halt their advances. Whereas against the T-95, other tanks can just take ground and take up superior positions against you and use their tactical advantages, or I guess terrain advantages, over you. Whereas against an IS-7 or an E-75, that is completely negated. Do you understand what I'm saying here about how you need mobility to support your armor profile? Which means that, you know, let's look at a mouse, right? And again, I understand we're crossing tiers here. Let's look at the IS-7 versus the mouse. The mouse is considered the most heavily armored tank in the game by a long shot. Maybe even the... Actually, I take that back. Maybe the E3 is considered... That's not the E3, but maybe the E3 is considered the most heavily armored tank. I don't know what camp you're in, but regardless, both of these tanks compared to the IS-7. The mouse has a fantastic side-scraping armor profile, rear-mounted turret, and really only has 2 weak points, those on the cheeks and then the one on the lower plate. And those are the really only things you can pen frontally. And if you're running calibrated shells, it does become an easier job, or if you're playing the Jagdpanzer E100 or Object 268, then you can just gold right through the front of the mouse, which that's not, but that's a very niche case, right? So I'm not going to talk about that too much. And the E3, fantastic frontal armor profile, really only has 3 weak points as well, lower plate, cupola, and then small commander's hatch on the right. Probably shouldn't have said that last one, but anyways, the IS-7, let's look at the armor profile. 150 on the front compared to 200 on the front. 150 on the front compared to 305 on the front. However, the IS-7 has sloped armor, making its effective armor so much higher. And while it does not have raw thickness, it is taking this armor profile at 50 kilometers an hour compared to the mouse's 25 kilometers an hour. The E3 at 35 kilometers an hour. So if you want to put this in percentage terms, the IS-7 makes it to a location twice as fast as a mouse, and it is able to use its armor profile that much faster and is able to halt advances of tanks twice as fast as a mouse. Or comparing an IS-7 to an E3, the IS-7 will make it there, or I'll say the E3 will make it there 40% slower than the IS-7. Or 30% slower than the IS-7. This is why it is such an enormous problem for tanks like the mouse or the E3. And keep in mind that the E3 was limited to, I think, 20-25 kilometers an hour beforehand. So it makes it really hard to put this kind of armor into play in the game if no one is going to shoot at you, or the battle is already over, because armor is strong in numbers. But you know, if it's 7-on-1, it is really hard to cover all those angles, right? If the battle's already over and it's 7-on-1, you just possibly cannot angle to every single gun and bounce everything. I can't even do that. So it's a big ask for the mouse and the E3, whereas the IS-7, you can get to the middle of Canyon pretty easily and use that armor profile. You can take it to the corner of Winter Malinovka and use the armor profile. You can take it to Rockfield in that dip on the non-bunker side, or you can go to the bunker side and use hull down locations there and a super strong turret. Whereas the mouse, it will get there, yes. But it'll just take much longer, and by that time, your team might have been rolled, or the other team may have taken up even better positions, and you will not be able to use a lot of cover to help yourself out, right? So I hope this makes a impression on you for why having speed complemented with armor makes it very, very lethal as compared to just thick armor. Now, the third and final thing I want to say about what you should be looking for in a good armor profile is that you should have armor that gives the illusion that it can be penned. And you're thinking, well, the point of armor is to bounce shots when they come in. Yes, or not make the enemy shoot at you. But let's consider a few different scenarios. First, let's look at the leopard and the pattern again. And let's say we're on Canyon and the leopard and the pattern are on the same team, going against two STBs, right? So leopard and pattern are on the middle ridge of Canyon. The pattern does have a few points in its turret where it looks like it's going to be penned. Or actually, let's not use this example. Let's talk about the M103. This is a great example of it. And then let's talk about the AMX 5120. And let's also throw up an ST1 here because I will need this as a point of reference. Now, same scenario that they're all on Canyon, right? And they're fighting, doesn't matter what, something that can shoot them on the mid-ridge. Now, let's say it's the AMX 5120 and the M103 up on the middle of Canyon. The enemy will shoot the AMX 5120. They're not going to bother with the M103, usually, if there's an AMX 5120 available to shoot in the middle, simply because it has no armor. And they'll shoot that every single time. And it will pen, which is the worst part, right? But looking at the M103 standalone, the M103 has decent amounts of armor on the turret and the hull, actually. It's not uber armored, so it can still be penned, but you want armor that gives the illusion that it can be penned, because you want them to fire at it, right? If no one ever fires at your armor, you might as well be driving a leopard. You want something that makes people think, I have a chance of penning this. So that is why tanks like the IS-7 are so good, because it shows gray on the front. People think, oh, I can pen this here, and then they don't. Or the E-75's lower plate, they think it's gray, and it's actually going to bounce. Or the M103, regardless of whether you load APCR or gold, or I'm sorry, heat, or standard or heat, the weak spots are almost the same. It doesn't really matter. The M103 has a fantastic armor profile in this sense because people think they can pen it, and then when they bounce, it really pisses them off. So that is one shot that you're taking with your armor profile and bouncing that, let's say, the Leopard 1 next to you or the AMX 5120 next to you doesn't have to take. So if you're using your armor profile well, making sure that on the AMX 50B's interclip reloads or the full clip reloads, you're up there doing the business, making sure the mediums on the other side of that ridge are engaging you, your team is gonna fare a lot better because people think they can pen you, but they can't. Now, let's say if this is the ST1 and the AMX 5120. Let's look at the difference here, or I guess the difference in psychology here. Let's say both of these people are up on the mid-ridge of Canyon again. Now, even if the AMX 5120 goes on clip reload and you're doing the business in the ST1, people will still try and shoot the AMX 5120 even when it's hiding. Why? Because they know they don't have any chance in hell of penning the ST1, so they're just going to go for the guaranteed pen. But if you're playing the M103, they think they can pen you, so they'll try and waste their time with you instead of trying to hit the AMX 5120. You see what I mean here about having armor that gives the illusion that it can be penned? Because if you're in a mouse or an E3, and I've seen this happen so many times, especially in an E3, E3 will make it out to a location and use its armor profile, right? But by the time that this has happened, maybe like 1-2 tanks are gone, right? Or even if the whole team is still there, everyone will just leave. And then the E3 has to clamber its butt all around the field all over again to set up its armor profile. The E3 requires a lot of setup in its armor profile. It's slow, and it requires the right conditions to use its armor profile. And if no one's gonna shoot at you, and they're just gonna shoot at their friends, shoot at your friends. If you're driving the E3, your armor profile is useless. You want to know how many times I've just ran away and shot something else if I'm in a, E50M? I know, unless I get the lower plate or get lucky with the cupola, I'm not going through that E3. So I'll just go shoot something else. And if E3's not shooting me or anyone on my team, or it's relocating, it's not dangerous at all. Its armor profile is not in play. Its gun is not in play, which makes it effectively just a tank out of the game. Whereas in a medium tank, yes, the E50M does not have a fantastic armor profile like the E50M, but it can relocate and use that armor profile a lot more effectively than the E3. And the E50M will bounce more shells than the E3 in certain scenarios because people think that they can pen the E50M. This is another comparison I like, the E3 versus E50M. So many people think that they can pen a side-scraping E50M, and yes, even I have been tricked by this sometimes as well. Sometimes the angles are really wonky. Sometimes the lower plate angle is also very wonky as well, and people think that they can pen it, and they don't. But not with the E3. People will just say, fuck it, I'll just go shoot something else with the E3. There's no point in trying and engage in E3 when I'm not going to pen. So they'll just go shoot something else, farm the crap out of something else, and then when you're left alone against 1 versus 7, then they will come back and eat you alive with their teammates in your turretless tank destroyer. I hope this really clears up some important aspects of armor profile for you. I feel like if I explained any more, I'd be talking in circles, but if you enjoyed that content, please hit that like button and subscribe. And if you didn't, please leave your constructive criticism in the comment section. A note about replays. I have been receiving a lot of replays from you guys, and that's great. However, I am having a little bit of trouble opening them. I think this is a problem on my end, so what I'm doing is, you guys send them through email, right? And I download them to my computer as a file. And then I try opening them on my Steam through my Mac, because that's where I want to screen record, right? I never play on my Mac. I just downloaded Blitz for Steam Mac today. So when I download it and try to open the replay, it'll say open in World of Tanks Blitz, and I'll just go and click on that. And then when the game opens, it won't play the replay. So I am trying to troubleshoot that right now. I have seen your replays, and they will all be commentated on, granted, if they are a mastery, right? So I'm sorry that I have not been able to commentate on your replays as soon as I can. There are still a few replays from way before the update that I have not commentated on that I will be able to put out because they have not been sent in the Blitz replay kind of style that the recent mass of replays that I've been getting have been coming from. Anyways, that's the reason why replays are not working for me at the moment. I'm trying to troubleshoot that issue, and if you have any suggestions on why it's not working and how to troubleshoot it, please leave that in the comments as well. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion with you today, and I hope to see you next time.